On that date, China implemented comprehensive export restrictions on silver, measures presented not as sanctions or emergency controls, but as an administrative reorganization. The real impact, however, was immediate. Silver ceased to function as an ordinary commodity and began to be treated as a strategic resource. The decision was widely interpreted as a deliberate act of economic weaponization. By controlling between 60% and 70% of the world's refined silver supply, China did not need to announce a total embargo to disrupt the market. Redefining the rules of access was enough. From that moment forward, silver exports no longer responded to open market dynamics, but became dependent on state authorization. This shift transformed China's position within the global supply chain. It moved from being a major supplier to becoming the gatekeeper of access. Silver, essential to critical industries and advanced technological systems, was placed under political and administrative control. The global market no longer operated on availability and price alone, but on permits and strategic priorities. The importance of this move lay not only in the scale of control, but in its structural nature. It was not a temporary disruption or a response to a specific crisis. It represented a permanent redefinition of the metal's status. Silver was elevated to the same category as other sensitive resources, whose export is managed as a matter of national security. This initial act laid the foundation for a deep reconfiguration of the market. By turning silver into an instrument of economic power, China altered the traditional logic of metal trade. The key question was no longer how much silver costs, but who is allowed to access it. That shift in perspective defines the magnitude of the turning point that began on the first day of 2025. The restrictions did not merely reduce export volumes in a generic way. China completely redesigned the mechanism through which silver leaves the country by introducing a state-controlled licensing system. Under the new framework, only 44 state-approved companies were authorized to export silver, automatically excluding hundreds of small and mid-sized firms that had previously participated in international trade. This change had an immediate effect on market structure. Open competition was replaced by an administrative funnel. Access no longer depended on price, logistics efficiency, or commercial relationships, but on political approval. By concentrating export capacity in a small number of actors, the state gained direct oversight over who received silver, in what quantities, and under what conditions. The exclusion of smaller exporters was not a technical detail. It removed flexibility from the system and reduced the market's ability to self-regulate. Previously, multiple channels allowed silver to flow toward demand. Under the new model, those channels were closed, and supply became subject to centralized decisions that can change without warning. This framework formally elevated silver's status. It was no longer treated as a simple industrial metal, but as a strategic material comparable to other resources managed for national security reasons. Bureaucracy became the primary tool of control, not through explicit bans, but through selective permissions. The result was a silent but profound transformation. For international buyers, uncertainty increased sharply. Even long-standing commercial relationships could no longer guarantee continuity of supply. Every shipment became dependent on licenses, internal priorities, and criteria that are neither transparent nor stable over time. Thus, the licensing system did more than restrict volumes. It introduced a new variable into the market: unpredictability. Silver ceased to be a guaranteed input and became a conditional resource. Control was exercised not simply by reducing exports, but by redefining the very nature of access to the metal. The true core of China's power lies not only in mining, but in refining. While China ranks second in global silver mine production, its real dominance is concentrated in the critical stage where silver is transformed into usable industrial material. With 27 accredited silver refineries, more than double Japan's 13, China controls the most important bottleneck in the entire supply chain. This control makes China the effective gatekeeper of the global refined silver market. Most silver extracted worldwide is not immediately suitable for advanced industrial applications. It must undergo refining processes that require infrastructure, certifications, and specialized technical capacity. By concentrating this capacity, China exerts disproportionate influence over effective availability, regardless of where the silver is originally mined. The distinction between mining and refining is crucial. Mining can be geographically diversified. Refining cannot. It requires capital-intensive investment, technical expertise, and years of development. It cannot be replicated quickly in response to higher prices. As a result, even countries that produce silver remain dependent on China's refining system to convert it into a functional industrial input. This dominance redefines what supply actually means. Raw metal may exist in various locations, but without access to refining capacity, it cannot enter critical value chains. China does not need to control every mine to exercise power. Controlling the intermediate step that everyone must pass through is sufficient. The concentration of refining capacity also enables selective control. By deciding which batches are processed, with what priority, and for which destination, The system can favor domestic use or strategic partners without public announcements. Control operates administratively, quietly, consistently, and effectively. As a result, the true impact of the restrictions is not measured only in exported tonnage, but in the ability to decide which silver becomes usable and which remains immobilized. At that point, refining becomes a tool of geoeconomic power. China is not merely participating in the silver market, it is administering it at its most sensitive point. This strategy did not emerge in isolation. Analysts directly linked it to a clear precedent: China's rare earth policy in 2010. At that time, China used similar administrative tools, licenses, quotas, and bureaucratic procedures to restrict access to critical materials without imposing formal bans. The result was sustained price increases and a global restructuring of supply chains. The parallel lies not only in technique, but in logic. In both cases, the goal was not to abruptly cut supply, but to make it uncertain. Uncertainty forces buyers to alter behavior, accept new conditions, and negotiate from a position of weakness. In this context, bureaucracy proves more effective than an explicit embargo. Licensing allows granular control. Not all buyers are treated equally or on the same timeline. Access can be accelerated, delayed, or conditioned based on strategic priorities. This approach avoids direct retaliation while maximizing negotiating leverage. Control is not visible, but it is constant. The rare earth precedent demonstrated that rebuilding alternative supply chains takes years, even decades. Although other countries responded with investments and diversification projects, dependency did not disappear quickly. During that period, China consolidated its position and captured additional value. The analysis suggests silver is now following the same path. Applying this playbook to a metal as widely used and critical as silver amplifies the impact. Unlike rare earths, silver is embedded across a far broader range of industries. This magnifies the effect of any restriction and accelerates cost transmission throughout the global economy. The reference to 2010 therefore functions not merely as historical comparison, but as a warning. The pattern has already been observed, tested, and refined. Silver is not an exception. It is the next iteration of a strategy that turns administrative control into structural power. The effectiveness of this strategy is rooted in silver's unique industrial characteristics. Unlike many metals, its demand is neither optional nor easily replaceable. Silver possesses the highest electrical and thermal conductivity of any element, making it indispensable in modern technologies, where efficiency, miniaturization, and reliability leave no room for compromise. This explains its structural integration into advanced electronics, medical devices, telecommunications, and defense systems. These are not marginal uses. In many cases, reducing or eliminating silver would require complete redesigns of products, processes, and safety standards, changes that are neither immediate nor inexpensive. The analysis emphasized that theoretical substitution does not equal practical substitution. Even where alternatives exist in theory, deploying them at industrial scale requires years of adaptation, new certifications, and substantial capital investment. During that transition, demand for silver does not disappear. It persists, even under rising prices, because the alternative is production disruption. This rigidity creates structurally inelastic demand. Silver consumption does not respond elastically to short-term price increases. Industries cannot simply use less silver without compromising functionality in critical products. This characteristic amplifies the impact of any supply restriction. In this context, control of access becomes strategically decisive. When a resource is irreplaceable and its supply becomes uncertain, power lies not only in selling it, but in deciding who receives it. Silver stops behaving like a traditional commodity and begins functioning as a component of economic security. The combination of unique physical properties and industrial dependence makes silver an ideal pressure point. It is neither a niche metal nor a discretionary luxury. It is embedded in modern technological infrastructure. As a result, weaponization does not require absolute bans. Disrupting flow is enough to produce systemic impact. This pressure is further amplified by the structure of global silver supply. More than half of world production comes not from primary silver mines, but as a byproduct of mining other metals. This introduces fundamental rigidity. Even when silver prices rise sharply, production cannot be increased quickly because it depends on decisions made in other markets. This inelasticity limits the market's ability to self-correct. In most sectors, higher prices incentivize investment and supply expansion. In silver, that mechanism functions imperfectly. Primary silver mines represent a minority of supply, and new projects face long timelines, rising costs, and declining ore grades. The analysis also highlighted ongoing deterioration in ore quality and rising operational costs. Extracting each additional ounce requires more energy, more capital, and more time. These structural pressures further reduce the system's ability to respond to deliberate supply constraints. The result has been a persistently deficit market. Silver has recorded deficits for 4 consecutive years, with a 5th year of shortage projected in 2025. These imbalances have not been resolved through higher prices because supply cannot adjust fast enough. The deficit has become chronic, not cyclical. In this environment, any additional restriction has a disproportionate effect. When a market already operates at its limits, small disruptions generate amplified stress. China's decision to reconfigure access does not act on a balanced system, but on one already strained by structural shortages. This explains why silver weaponization is particularly powerful. It does not remove excess supply. It constrains a critical flow in a structurally tight market. At that point, price becomes secondary. The dominant variable becomes actual availability. The impact is most visible in industries where silver is non-negotiable. The solar energy sector was identified as especially exposed. Silver is essential in solar panel manufacturing, not by preference, but by technical necessity. While copper substitution is theoretically possible, the transition is neither immediate nor simple. Altering production lines, redesigning cells, and recalibrating industrial processes requires years. During that time, manufacturers cannot pause output while waiting for alternatives. They must absorb higher costs and secure supply to maintain production. This reality limits the sector's ability to reduce demand in response to price increases. The analysis suggested that meaningful demand destruction would only occur at extremely high price levels. Until then, cost increases are passed along the value chain. Pressure on supply does not ease, it consolidates. Silver continues flowing into uses that cannot be postponed without economic and political consequences. Defense industries are even more rigid. Silver is embedded in guidance systems, radar, sensors, and advanced communications equipment. These systems do not allow improvised substitutions or quality reductions. In this domain, supply is not merely economic, it is strategic. The analysis linked this to a broader resource control strategy. Silver does not operate in isolation. It joins other critical metals used in military applications, creating a layered dependency that magnifies supplier leverage. When multiple key inputs are concentrated under a single sphere of control, pressure compounds. The result extends beyond cost increases. It creates structural vulnerability. Industries central to energy transition and national security depend on a supply that is no longer fully reliable. In this context, silver ceases to be a neutral industrial input and becomes a factor of systemic stability or disruption, depending on who controls access. The direct consequence of this control is not merely scarcity, but geopolitical leverage. By making silver supply uncertain and conditional, China shifts negotiation from the market to the strategic table. Buyers are no longer negotiating only price and volume. They are negotiating access itself. Uncertainty proves more powerful than prohibition. When supply can be delayed, reduced, or conditioned without notice, buyers must plan under constant risk. This instability pushes companies and governments toward agreements that ensure continuity, even if those agreements require concessions beyond commerce. The analysis describes how this environment enables indirect demands. Negotiation extends beyond the metal to broader relationships, industrial partnerships, production localization, technological cooperation, or strategic alignment. Silver becomes the opening move in a larger game, where the resource functions as leverage over economic and political decisions. This pressure does not require public announcements or open confrontation. It operates administratively and contractually. Each license, approval, or delay sends an implicit signal about priority and conditions. Power is exercised quietly but continuously. The effectiveness of this leverage lies in its simultaneous impact on multiple critical sectors. Energy, defense, and advanced technology share the same foundational dependency. When access to silver becomes unpredictable, vulnerability spreads across the entire productive system. In this way, silver weaponization does not merely restrict volumes. It redefines the nature of exchange. The metal ceases to be a neutral commodity and becomes an instrument of influence. At that point, the market no longer responds solely to economic forces, but to strategic decisions that use supply as a mechanism of sustained pressure.